Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I'm your host, Edgar Mills. Thank you for joining us. Hello, America. Welcome to episode 62. So, based on the last episode, I was accused of not having a deep understanding or even knowing at all that there was a difference between communism, socialism, and democratic socialism. And I was accused by a 20-year-old Belgian lesbian, which is not to take away anything there except being 20 years old, for one. And as I think about that, I think that was more of a confession covered as a critique, because I think this young person absolutely doesn't know what they're talking about. So I'm going to talk about it. Now, look, I apologize for going on anti-communist rants. So this is part two of the two-part series here. And I didn't set it up to be a series. There was just so much more to say. So this is going to be the last of the communism madness. And then we'll do something, I don't know, easy breezy after that. So everybody knows communism, yeah, we all know the big bad communism. Socialism, which everybody thinks, oh no, but that's different, that's softer. And and then democratic socialism, which is it's not a new term by any stretch, but that's what our politicians in America like to use, that democratic socialism. They all claim to have obvious separation, but all the way back to the Communist Manifesto, everything you read and all the speeches and everything made by these prominent communists, the lines have always been blurred. There's never been actually, when communism came out, there was no such thing as democratic socialism, but there were already people in Europe calling themselves socialists, but they all share the same base doctrine, the same foundational doctrine, and they all claim the same enemy, which is what? Yep, capitalism. Capitalism. And they all logically, if you play out their policy, even as they call themselves three separate entities, as you play out the policy, they all end up in the same place. So is there a difference? Well, we'll go into it for sure. But their critique for all three of these, their critique is that capitalism concentrates power into the hands of a very few wealthy people, and that those people are greedy, and that they exploit labor, and that they block true equality. So, and that may be partially correct, but their answer is to consolidate the power into the hands of a very few people who just claim authority in the name of government. All the other negative things still apply. The government's greedy, right? Anyway, we'll get to that. Yeah, it's madness. So ultimately, they all three want state ownership of everything. Specifically, we're talking about the economic system. The use of the word democratic in front of socialism is, well, it's not a genuine departure from socialism. It's not a genuine departure at all. It's just subterfuge. It's just branding. That's what it is. They've just updated their brand. And the reason they've updated that brand, why does anybody rebrand? To either change their image, right? Or to separate themselves from whatever the old image was, whatever. And that's what they've done with the word democratic socialism, is they're trying to separate themselves from the, infamous failures of communism, as it was and as it is. And they're trying to, put plausible deniability, right? Well, that wasn't what that was communism. We're not for that. But all the while carrying on with the same exact policies. Yeah. So let's look at it. I guess socialism kind of forms the broader umbrella, because communism, although the policies are all the same, I think what they really want to differentiate is the means by which they achieve these policies. So communism is what? Single party dictatorship. That's what communism is. Single party dictatorship. They make the rules, you abide by the rules, or end up in the gulag, period. Whereas socialism aims to do that via democracy, to a degree, via vote, but they still want the same thing. They want collective or state ownership of everything, means of production, land, economic system, all the resources, major industry. That socialism wants that. Communism absolutely wants that. But it's all still just collectivism. It's all the same. The term democratic socialism kind of narrows that focus, and it adds that they want a socialist economic transition, but they still want to be committed to multi-party system and democracy and civil liberties and freedom. They claim these things. Civil liberties and freedom of speech. And just the pluralism, the diversity within the party or whatnot, or within the system. But that's not the way the policies logically play out. They can say they want that, but do their priorities show that? No, I don't think so. All right. So there's an organization. It exists, and it has existed probably since maybe the 50s. The Democratic Socialist America. They say that they would replace capitalism with a system that gives ordinary ordinary people real voice in workplaces, neighborhoods, and society, rejecting welfare state capitalism, which I don't even know what that is, and Soviet-style authoritarianism. What is welfare state capitalism? I should have taken more time just to try to research that phrase, but just on the surface, I don't know what that means. Welfare state capitalism. Yeah, I don't know what that means. If we were in a purely capitalist, purely constitutional republic, everybody's free, the government has very minimal fingers on things, what does welfare state even mean? And are they referring to private charity? I don't know. I'm not sure what that means. I know what Soviet-style authoritarianism is. But even Marx, even in his own sort of analysis of their ideals, he says that socialism is an early transitional stage to get to a classless, stateless society. Karl Marx said that socialism is early stage communism. Okay. From the horse's mouth, folks. That's from the horse's mouth. Yeah. Early transitional stage. Prior to the Bolshevik Revolution, the socialist and communist terms were used kind of interchangeably. Yeah. So I guess you could say communism was invented, I guess you could say, in whenever they wrote, 1848, I think, with the Communist Manifesto. Again, socialism sort of existed prior to that. But yeah, those words were used interchangeably. And here's why. Because both of the ideologies, even though they're not very distinct at all, they bemoan private ownership as the root cause of class warfare, class conflict. And what does that mean? What is this class conflict? They bemoan capitalism as the root of class conflict. Well, what that means to me is one group is envious of another group. They have something that I don't have, and that's not right. Well, what makes it not right? And we'll get to this stuff about, rich versus poor and all, but if you go back to the very earliest man, I mean, everybody started out on an equal playing field. So it is the ideology of envy. I will stand by that. And I will argue that. And I will point case after case of that. But that statement alone tells us that. And this is from Karl Marx, folks. Yeah, so anyway, adding the word democratic to socialism that's just tactics. There's no substance there. And it's about making leftist candidates electable. But it's just for electability. There's no philosophical shift. There's no philosophical branch that doesn't target capitalism and the abolishment of private ownership of things. All right. That's just quick definitions that I kind of went off on. Look, so obviously this started in the 19th century, Industrial Revolution. There was a utopian socialists. That was a group back then. The British Chartists, and then even the early Marxists, they all wanted political democracy, which is good, right? But they wanted that in conjunction with government or public. So I'm going to use public and government interchangeably. When you say the public sector, they're referring to the government run set, because everybody, we all own the government. We are the boss of the government. Functionally, that is not true. So public control. They want political democracy, but public control. What if I vote against public control? Well, they don't want political democracy at all. Well, and what they want is pure democracy, so that 51% can overrule the 49%, and it's easy enough to pay off the 51%. So anyway. Oh, man. So both Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, and they did praise sort of democratic election or elected. There was a Paris Commune, and that was democratically elected Paris Commune, and they used socialism and communism interchangeably. They did. And I'm getting off track. Sorry. The Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, because that was such a hard line, that forced a sort of a public split. And then you had sort of democratic reformists / socialists who rejected the hard revolutionary sort of vanguard Lenin style communism and the Stalinist authoritarianism, because that was hardline stuff, man. And so, yeah, there was a little split there, but over tactics, though, not ideology, just tactics. And then fast forward that to the leftists of the 1960s and 70s. That's when we came up with the Democratic Socialists of America, which that's what sort of put that into our lexicon. And it became the new face, acceptable face, the new smiling face of an old, ugly ideology that started back during the Bolshevik Revolution, when there was a split as far as tactics go. Still all with the same goal of state ownership. That never changed. But they only added that after the hardliners sort of claimed socialism, right? The hardline communist authoritarian, they claimed socialism. So then they felt a need to add democratic socialism onto it to make it more palatable. All three with the same goals. So they all converge. There are no substantive philosophical differences there. They all insist that political democracy alone ain't enough, that they need control of the economy as well. Because if you have control of the economy, if you concentrate the economy into very centralized hands, well, why they think that works, I don't know, but that's what they want. along with government control. So government control and economic control. As capitalism is, those are separate to a large degree. Now, I'm going to point out stuff a little later where they unfortunately merge. But these people all still want workplaces that have that run on like a democracy. Kind of like what I imagine the unions, right? That's a very communist thing, a very socialist thing, a very democratic socialist thing, if you will. The unions, right? And what do unions ultimately do? Well, you might get paid more if you're a union guy. You might get paid a little more, and you might have some good benefits. But they're choking out the profit margin of the company. Oh well, profits. The owners of the company shouldn't get all these profits. That's evil. The means of production, they couldn't do it without the labor. It's an age-old argument, but the labor wouldn't have any place to labor if the creator didn't create the business to begin with. And I'll get to that in a bit too, with a direct quote from Karl Marx. So anyway, where was I at? Unions. And they all want major industries to be state controlled, which is basically one big giant union, I guess. And they argue that capitalism is just inevitably produces inequality without recognizing or acknowledging or admitting that that's what communism does. Well, no, I'm sorry. Communism does create equality. Everybody equally poor, equally hungry, equally uninspired. But they argue that it exploits people, leads to alienation and all this and that. And they argue, the communists and socialists and democratic socialists, that and they say true liberty and equality and solidarity requires the absolute total replacement of our system as it is. I disagree. I disagree with that. So they all use the same scapegoat or straw man or whatever, which is that capitalism is bad and class warfare is bad because of capitalism. And the ultimate aim for these people is to make all businesses operate for no profit and essentially to abolish, wage labor. So for me to go out, so what does that mean though? Then how do I choose what job I want? Excuse me, golly. How do I choose what job I want? Well, if I want to be a firearms instructor for a company, one company pays $300 a day and one company pays $500 a day. Well, I'm going to go to the company probably that pays $500 a day, right? Well, if neither company pays anything, now I got to go and, okay, well, now I have to decide, okay, do I like this guy? Do I like that guy? Is this location good? My job, whatever. And then what's my incentive to go work at all if it's for free? I still got to pay bills. Or do I get all my food provided for free? Or do I have some universal basic income? Well, that's kind of their answer to that. It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. So again, anyway, they want to nationalize everything. Redistribute wealth is a key talking point, even in modern American democratic left politics. It's all about redistribution. That's what taxes are. They take taxes from people who earn money, and then they redistribute that money throughout various systems, whether it be welfare systems or just public works or whatever it is they do. And all that stuff kills incentive to do anything, to create. So the primarily advertised key difference with communism, socialism, democratic socialism is that the democratic socialism claims multi-party democracy and whereas socialism and communism kind of it's a state single party system. That's the key difference. That's the only real difference. And then the democratic socialists kind of on the surface reject authoritarian rule, but again, the policies play out the opposite of that. So anyway, yeah, critics like myself, unrepentant capitalists like myself, yeah, man, we criticize the term democratic socialism as just subterfuge. It's just cover. It's just an acceptable sounding name on top of communism. And there's communists in America that claim communism, but I don't know what in the hell they're thinking. I don't know what I think that ultimately, I think if you're an American born, American raised, self professed communist, I think it's just a form of, damn, what's the word I'm looking for, man? Being contrary, just that you want to rebel against whatever the system is, whatever the system is. If we were a communist society, then you would be a freedom loving capitalist. That's what I think. I think a lot of it's fashion. I think a lot of it is to put themselves in this position of the underdog, the downtrodden, the victim class, so that they can then speak from a position of seeking sympathy for being the underdog, I guess. That's what I think about that. But I've got no compassion for anybody who claims to be an outright communist in America. And I certainly, even the democratic socialists, that's just a lie. That's just a nice sounding label. You're still a communist. All right, who are some prominent figures who have blurred those lines? If there were distinct lines, let's see. Rosa Luxemburg was she championed socialism, but she co-founded the Communist Party of Germany. So she claimed socialism and then literally co-founded the Communist Party of Germany and was professed committed Marxist revolutionary. Yeah. A fellow named Michael Harrington, the founder of the Democratic Socialists of America, who wrote a book, by the way, called The Other America, which expectedly or not surprisingly inspired LBJ's war on poverty. Well, what happened with LBJ's war on poverty, folks? Did poverty go away? Was there any favorable impact on poverty whatsoever? All of those policies were very communistic, socialistic policies. And all they did was create an entire generation of state-dependent human beings. Anyway, sorry. Michael Harrington described himself as a democratic Marxist. That doesn't even make sense. It's almost, they're two contradictory terms. Yeah, but he drew his philosophy straight from Marx and Engels. And even though it's the Democratic Socialists of America, he welcomed in hardline communists and Marxists, yeah, to that organization. And then there's we all know him, we all love him, Bernie Sanders. He continually praises, he's always on about the literacy campaigns in Cuba or the medical system in Cuba. To point out the flaws in our medical system does not mean you have to jump all the way to the communist model. Healthcare may be free, but you stand in line for it. Or if you're in the party, you have you get the private doctor. Yeah, man. Bernie Sanders. Bernie, he visited, he was a big buddy back in the Soviet days. He visited the Soviet Union, I believe on a honeymoon, even on vacation. He's a communist. He's a communist. He praises Sandinista Nicaraguans. He praises China's development. And even though China is the biggest hypocrite on the planet, they are under communist rule, but they like to flirt with capitalism for sure. But still, they'll just undercut the capitalist market in the world, right? The international market. They'll undercut that, but still all the money stays concentrated with the party. So that's just hypocrisy. But Bernie praises him. He praises him, Bernie Sanders. And Bernie, he pushes, I believe he called himself a democratic socialist. He pushes their policies. They hate capitalism. I don't know why. Bernie's a millionaire. I don't know. I remember an article a few years ago. How many multi-million-dollar properties does Bernie Sanders own? If he's against private ownership, why does he own 3 or 4 multi-million-dollar properties? Anybody care? Do you know Bernie Sanders never had a job, a proper job in his life, a paid job? Anyway, this isn't about Bernie Sanders. Yeah, Democratic Socialists of America openly allows in communists and Marxists and Leninists. Yep. So even for these figures, the lines are they're blurry. They're blurry lines. There's no distinct, oh, this is democratic socialism, this is communism. There's no distinct lines. Even in modern day, you can still see the overlap. And today's politics, and that was some figures from, kind of throughout the past, 100 years or whatnot. Today's politics, there's still no clear distinction. Again, the democratic qualifier is just a marketing tool, a branding tool to tiptoe around the blood-stained legacy, the murderous legacy left behind by Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot and Castro and Chavez. And all those guys pushed the same exact anti-capitalist rhetoric. They all had the same vision of total state control, nationalization of everything. Now, some through ballots, right? Some through vote. But even then, we'll get to fair elections here in a little bit. But mostly through violence. Yeah, mostly through violence. And in today's politics, what? You got Bernie Sanders style platforms, right? Free Medicare for all, new Green Deal shit, wealth taxes. Look at how many ways money gets taxed. Then they want to push worker ownership, like union stuff, right? Where workers seize the means of production. And all of that stuff mimics exactly the economic structures of these past failed communist regimes. Yeah. And in practice, you get the same results, folks. Yep. In practice, you get the same results. Now, in today's modern dynamics, the social media discourse, right? You can get into your little bubbles and you guys can pump up capitalism capitalism and liberty and all that, and the Ayn Rand Institute and all these things and Austrian economics, and we can talk about all that. And then the other end of that is you got your communist bubbles who talk about, how it could be this, it could be that. Well, we've got demonstrated success on one side and demonstrated failure on the other. But if you would just let us do it the way we want to do it, well, that's not democracy, is it? So the social media puts us in bubbles. The corporate media, i.e., ergo, e.g., whatever you want to say, state media, because it's all approved through some ideological whatever terms. It's all approved. Corporate media, and then you got all the political activists who are the loudest on both of these platforms. Yeah, they treat democratic socialism. I'm doing finger quotes for you guys. Democratic. Every time I say democratic socialism, imagine me doing air finger quotes around the word democratic. They treat that term as a different thing, so that it's palatable. So that it makes communism and radical socialism palatable, and they have some level of plausible deniability. They still have the same exact enemy, capitalism. They still have the same exact goals, total system replacement. I'm repeating this shit over and over again because I want you to understand. You can't show me and you can't tell me where there's different goals. If you can, please pipe up. Please, please, please email me and lay out the argument, your objective argument. Yeah, don't just tell me I don't know what this and what that is. Tell me why it's good. And show me examples throughout the history of the system, the communist system. What universal good has it brought to the world today? Show me that. They all three want centralization of power. And so you can be a democratic socialist and say, well, no, we want to vote in centralization. Or you can be a communist and say, no, we want to take over. Either way, they still wet their panties for centralized control. And once the government has total control over economics, the legal system, education, the medical system, whatever, it'll melt into one ruling party. Even if it does get voted in that way, it'll never get voted out again. Because once that system is locked in and you no longer are able to have free and fair and separate elections, you will never again see a multi-party election. And I point you to North Korea. Go look at North Korea. See how their votes work. Just Google North Korean voting system, election system. All right, this is about to get tedious, but we're going to do it. I am about to go over the 10 planks of communism taken directly from the Communist Manifesto, Chapter 2, as written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in 1848. And these were proposed as practical steps for the proletariat, read the people, the regular people, right, the low people, as practical steps for the proletariat to centralize power amongst themselves. But that alone is a contradiction. The people cannot centralize power. At any rate, to centralize power and the means of production in advanced countries. And it's very important that I said that they targeted advanced countries. Because what's the irony here? Why did they target advanced countries? Well, I'm going to quote straight from the Communist Manifesto. The bourgeoisie, now that's the in-charge people, the capitalists, all right, be with me here. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? What that is an absolute acknowledgement and praise that the system as it built via capitalism that created all of these advancements and lifted the quality of life to such an extremely high level. It couldn't have been done without the capitalism. But they said it slumbered in the lap of social labor. What does that mean? Well, not everybody is a visionary. People who are visionaries deserve to be compensated for their vision. All right, so anyway, Marx himself praised the productive power of capitalism. For good or bad, like, okay, yeah, we clear land to build a factory. Okay, well, that factory employs people, pays people, people's quality of life raises, and now the Karl Marx types wants to come in and take over the factory. The people who built it no longer get profit off of it because now the state runs it. The state has decided to pay everybody at a certain level, much higher than the market dictates. So now it costs more money to operate the factory. So the profit margin shrinks and shrinks. And then the state takes the profits and redistributes it in other sectors or whatever. And now the factory no longer makes any profit. And, well, what happens after that? If the factory no longer makes enough money to pay the people working at it, and it no longer makes profits, so nobody has any incentive to innovate or to keep it going, well, now all those factory workers who had a job making market wages, who got this awesome state wage boost, who 3, 4, 5, 10 years later, now they don't have any job at all. Okay, well, the government will put us in another job. Come on, man. All right, I'm off track. I'm going to go I'm going to go point by point. There were 10 planks or pillars or points of communism that they thought would make things good and great and awesome. And then I'm going to point out, in America, what policies do we have in place that support that? And then what politicians are pushing to further support these 10 planks of communism. And mind you, when I'm saying this, I'm saying these are wrong. These are no good. They sound good on the surface. Some of them do. Some of them don't even sound good on the surface. Why is American politicians in a capitalist constitutional republic trying to prioritize law and policy to support any pillar of communism? Number one, abolition of property and land and application of all rents of land to public purpose. All right. Well, abolition of property and land. So abolition of private property, private land ownership, and then apply all rents of land to public purposes. Read taxes. How do we see that in America today? Overreaching zoning laws, land use regulations, eminent domain. The government wants a piece of land. If they're building a highway that goes square through the middle of your 20 acres, guess what? They're taking it. You may get compensated, you may not. Property taxes, like exorbitant property taxes. These are all directly supporting this number one pillar of communism here. Because these property taxes go where? Well, do they pay for public schools, or public road? I don't know. They pay for different things. Once the government gets your money, it's kind of, the accountability of it's kind of lost anyway. It goes into government revenue. That's what it goes. And then the control that the federal and state government has over vast public lands, which restricts private development. Now, is that altogether bad? No, I'm a fan of Theodore Roosevelt. I think the public park system is good. I think there needs to be protected space, historic and beautiful, and preserve America in a way that it was, in its originality, right? I agree with the public park systems. But also, if the government decided they want to section off a piece of a public park in order to put low-cost multifamily housing on it, they would do it. That's the problem when the government owns things. You don't have much say in it. And who's pushing it? Well, you're going to hear three names over and over again: Cortez, Sanders, and Elizabeth and Warren, because they're the three most notable hard left, progressive, whatever you want to call them, democratic socialists. Cortez specifically has supported like very aggressive zoning and planning reforms because of this new Green New Deal thing. And it's all in the name of public purpose and some kind of climate equity. What does climate equity mean? F if I know. And all in the name of affordable housing and all emphasizing the government oversight and government control over these private properties. All right, number two, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. Yeah, we have it. And that's it. Federal income tax. Tax brackets up to like 37+%. And then you got state taxes. So state and federal combined, you could be paying well over 50% of your income to a state entity. In what bizarro world is that legitimate? Is that justified? When this first got sold, whenever the first time income tax ever got sold to the American people, what in the hell was the sales pitch? That must have been the most charming, most charismatic friggin' lawmaker to have ever walked the planet. How can you justify taking somebody's income for any reason? Oh my God. So anyway, yes, income tax. That's it. And then of course, the lefties, they're all about, well, we got to tax the rich more. We got to tax the rich more. Well, we got to tax the ultra rich. Well, if that happens, man, like the ultra rich are going to leave. Sanders and Warren always are calling for the higher progressive sort of tax rates and Warren has a thing that's called the ultra millionaires tax. And Sanders has explicitly, and I quote, said we need to soak the rich. Soak them with what? Laws, taxes. Soak them with taxes. Well, if I'm a millionaire, folks, and I'm paying all this ridiculous amount of money, at some point, yes, there's already people moving money offshore, and there's loopholes. There's plenty of them. At some point, if they start closing those loopholes, I'm just going to move to a tax-friendly country. Patriotism goes a long way, but when your country no longer looks like what it was founded to be, yeah, there are people that will move. And I'm not talking about these actors who, if Donald Trump gets elected, I'm moving to Canada. That's performative. That's theater. I'm talking about real millionaires who are paying real taxes, by the way, at high levels, and they're just going to take their money and go. I draw the parallel with Atlas Shrugged. All right, heavy progressive tax. Number 3, abolition of all rights of inheritance. How is that justified? If my dad started from scratch and built a business and became wealthy, and he dies and he leaves me his wealth, how does the government have a claim on it? How does anyone have a claim on it? If my dad wrote in a piece of paper, I want my son to have all of my assets, how do you justify the government? Well, then you're just a trust fund baby and you didn't earn your money. Well, fuck. My dad earned it, and I'm a piece of my dad. So you're mad about how I got my money because you don't have money? It's envy. It all comes back to envy, ultimately. Inheritance tax. Some rates are up to 40%. Now, there's an exemption currently of $13 million per person. And that's good, right? People like Bernie Sanders are trying to expand that and lower the exemption to $3.5 million, and then raise rates even higher on billionaires, because they don't want the money to stay in the family. They want the money to dissipate and go wherever. It's such bullcrap. It is straight out theft. Abolition of rights of inheritance. Number 4. Now this one is interpretive, right? Confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels. Well, who were immigrants and rebels when Karl Marx wrote this, and Engels? First of all, let's talk about immigrants for just a sec. The communists are no friend to diversity, just so you know that. And who they are referring to as rebels aren't rebels against they're rebels against the communism, right? So this is where I'm talking about now. If you're talking about confiscation of property on all immigrants, well, what about Americans who are immigrating somewhere else? What about the millionaires who are leaving? So they want to do exit taxes on wealthy citizens who renounce citizenship, so that I can't take my money and I can't take my ball and go home, right? They want to have a claim on my money no matter where I decide to live, no matter why I decided to live there. And then they tax, there's expatriates, there's tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of expats living around the world, working in a foreign ecosystem, earning money from foreign entities, and Americans, and they're still getting taxed. That's insane. And then there's, now I've never been a fan of this, and I disagree with it, civil asset forfeiture. And in many cases, even if you get charged with something, they can seize your assets. And if you get exonerated, they still have your assets and aren't compelled to give them back. And you don't have enough money to go to court to get them back. Bizarre. It's all theft. It's all theft. And on that same note, like your lefties like Bernie Sanders, for instance, they're all about closing all these offshore loopholes. And I mean, I am too, but in a sense to where our entire tax code needs to be completely trashed and trashed. I'm all about some flat, close all loopholes, do flat tax or do just sales tax on goods or something. But even then, man, all this taxation, it's all literally theft. That's not a catchphrase. It's not a meme. Taxation is theft. You can't justify it. Number 5, this is a good one. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. That's a 5th pillar of communism. What do we know and love today in America that is exactly that? Now, I'm going to let you dwell on it for a sec. Yes, the Federal Reserve. That is exactly what it is. It is a centralized, heavily, well, they regulate, right? When I say it's heavily regulated, that don't mean the Federal Reserve has a monopoly, no doubt about it. They choose how much the dollar's worth. They choose when to print money and when not, et cetera, et cetera. They control the credit of the United States government or the United States Corporation, whatever you want to call it. Now, it talks a little bit about Dodd-Frank and all that stuff, but the Federal Reserve, it's not. It's a dang scam. And then also back Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. You guys remember the housing collapse and the too big to fail madness. That's what happens when you have a centralized bank. That's what happens when you have the Federal Reserve. And of course, you got the lefty politicians who love it. They love it. You know, Warren was a part of that consumer financial protection thing. And she wanted stricter government controls to curb predatory lending. But what that ultimately would lead to is just nationalization of all lending. And then what? Well, still it'll be based on a credit score or a social score or some other shit if you needed money. Now, I don't advocate borrowing money. I've done it, and I'm in a hole because of it. But the lending wasn't predatory. I was fully aware of what I was doing. That's the problem. The government wants to be your nanny. All right, number 6. And this is a good one too. Centralization of the means of communication and transportation in the hands of the state. Well, holy cow, let's see. Well, we got the FCC, right, that regulates broadcasting and internet to a degree. We have government-owned infrastructure like Amtrak, the Aviation Administration, the TSA, all that. And then, of course, the federal highways going across the country. Well, the lefties, AOC and the Congressional Progressive Caucus, they talk about high-speed rail all the time. Like that, I don't know what they plan, why that's going to be a silver bullet for anything. High-speed rail. The amount of money it would cost to build that, if the government does it, is going to be cosmic, astronomical. Even for a private company to build it, it's still going to be that. But we'll get to it in a sec. They want to make internet as a utility, so they can control, obviously. So eventually, you can be censored if they want. And of course, they want to expand government oversight over big tech and communications, by the way. All right. So that they can probably do warrantless spying on your phone, all in the name of equity and some climate goal. How do you attach that to climate goals? Well, the data centers, Edgar, the data centers. Well, I'm going to show you. So we talked about the rail system. We talked about Amtrak. I'm going to give you a breakdown from 2016 until 2025. And I'm going to tell you their net loss year on year. Are you ready? In 2016, they lost $1.08 billion. That's B. I'm saying billion. In 2017, they lost $969 million. In 18, they lost $817 million. 19, they lost $875 million. In 2020, they lost $1.6 billion. From 21 to 23, for whatever reason, those numbers weren't tracked per. They lost 1.2 to 1.5 billion for each of those years. 2024, they lost $1.81 billion. And for 2025, they lost $1.76 billion. Are you kidding me? That's a government-run operation. Now, I happen to have a love affair with the train, the romanticism of the train system, of taking a train up the coast or across the country. I think it's attached some 1920s. It's to me, a very Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, film noir thing. I like it. I think it's cool. But why is it? It's not failing because they still pay money into it, but it's existing at a loss. Why? Why should it exist at a loss? If I was a private train company and I lost that much money in 1 year, I would be done. That's it. Okay, speaking of government-run operations, now this one is mandated by the Constitution. The Postal Service, the U.S. Post Office. I'm going to give you the same numbers year on year from 2016. The Post Office law in 2016, $5.6 billion. 2017, $2.7 billion. 2018, $3.9 billion. 2019, $8.8 billion. 2020, $9.2 billion. 2021, $4.9 billion. 2020, where am I? 22. All right, they did a thing where they got a big cash push. Well, non-cash. They got funded and still, to the tune of $57 billion, by the way, and still lost $1 billion. 2023, $6.5 billion loss. 2024, $9.5 billion loss. 2025, $9 billion loss. Good people, that is government-run operations. Billions and billions of dollars lost. It's somewhere. It's in someone's pocket. Not mine and not yours. It came from our pockets. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil, generally in accordance with a common plan. Well, what do we do in America that props that pillar? Well, government subsidies and mandates and whatnot on various sectors like agriculture or industry, or they do these big stupid green energy loans to, you guys remember Solyndra? They gave all this massive amounts of money to this solar company that was supposed to change the way we consume energy, and it failed. The government picking winners and losers. Federal land management and agriculture plan. The government, when they decide what crop they want to sell overseas, they subsidize that crop. They pay farmers massive amounts of money for that crop. So if you're a farmer that doesn't do that crop, you just got effed. because the government don't look at how we feed America. They look at how we import. How much money can we make on this overseas? They don't care about you. So they'll subsidize a thing, whatever that thing is. So if you're adaptable as a farmer, you can change your crops and you can get the government subsidies and you can live large. If you're not adaptable, if you're a smaller sized farmer, yeah, that's it. You're effed. Now, this is where AOC's new or Green New Deal comes into play. She's all about government control and restrictions on all this regulating industry and manufacturing and agriculture as a just transition into government-controlled energy production. Yep. Number 8. Now, this is a good one. Check it out. Some of you ain't going to like it. As far as communism goes, none of this is good, but check it out. Equal liability of all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Okay, let's look at that. Equal liability, what that sounds like on the surface is everybody should work. Well, okay. We have a lot of people on welfare and unemployment, a lot, and they get money. Well, if we propose as a conservative or whatever, a libertarian, propose that, hey, if you're on welfare, there's got to be some kind of work requirement. It ain't got to be freaking, man, you ain't got to go cut trees down for 12 hours a day, right? You have to have a job to where you make some kind of contribution to society. But that gets bemoaned. People on welfare don't want to work. Unemployment benefits. Well, used to, and I don't know if it's still this way, if you want unemployment, you had to go to the unemployment office every week and show, like, you know, I've applied to this many places, and here's the status. They don't do any such thing now, but so that's a little in contrast. Now, clearly there's no literal industrial armies, right? But creating these federal work programs and these government guaranteed jobs, that kind of mimics that. The government is not in the government should get out of the way so that jobs can happen. But instead it wants to stick its fingers in and then pick and choose what jobs happen. And it's a manipulation of the market, really. And of course, Bernie Sanders is a big advocate of the federal job guarantee. I guess that would mean everybody would work, I suppose, but they got to get paid, and they got to get paid from somewhere. And if it's at the post office and they're getting paid, but the post office is losing $5 billion a year, do you see how it's madness? It's absolute madness. Number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the population over the country. Let's see. As we drive through Atlanta, I remember in the 80s and 90s, Atlanta existed, and in Buckhead, there was a little kind of a distinct space there, and then it sort of started blending together. Well, what about on the northwest side where the Braves the Arsenal is? That northwest corridor it's merging, right? Our suburbs are just getting engulfed. Gwinnett County it's all getting engulfed, right? The urban area is spreading, the suburban areas are spreading, and that right there is a gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country. Now, I don't necessarily hate that as long as it's natural from the free market. I don't necessarily hate it. But what we're talking about via government control is, what does the government like to do? Well, you go to a rural area and you've already de-subsidized. So let's say a farmer was getting subsidies for years to do a certain crop, and he owns 300 acres or whatnot, and he no longer gets those subsidies. His crop has fallen out of fashion. He was not adaptable, and Now the government comes in and says, hey, we want your land. We'll give you this much for it. He's on the end of his productive years, so he's like, yeah, okay. So the government now has this guy's 300 acres of land, and they decide to turn it into a little multi-family, high-capacity, low-cost housing development and the beginnings of a smart city. Well, all the other farmers around are now like, what the hell? Yeah, man, that's what's going on right there when the government gets involved. And you got these rural development grants. You see neighborhoods popping up everywhere, but they get government money if there's going to be some low-cost housing and sprinkled in, right? So the government's subsidizing things that the free market just doesn't care for. Yeah, man, it's just another form of redistribution. All right, number 10. This is the last one. Excuse me. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production. All right, that's 3 sentences. I'm going to break them down. First of all, free education for all children in public schools. We already have laws. You have to go to school. Kids have to go to school. Fortunately, in America, it doesn't have to be public school, but that's the most common. Is it free? Nope. Why isn't it free? Well, because you pay property taxes and you pay for it. Somebody pays for it. If you're a single couple in your 20s and you have no children, you still pay for the school system. Is that fair? I don't think so. If you're a retired couple and your children have long since been out of school, you're still paying for it. Is that good? No, I don't think so. However, well, don't you want kids to go to school, Edgar? Yep. Private school, charter school, Montessori school, and my favorite, homeschool. I wish I'd have been more educated on homeschool. Yeah, I wish I would have. I strongly encourage everyone out there listening to look into homeschool. If you remotely have the time and capacity to do it. The capacity isn't that big of a deal. It's just the time. But even then, there's programs, there's collectives, there's other things out there where you can get it done without having your kids indoctrinated, which leads us into the next sentence. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Remember, this was written in 1848. So, they want kids in school. They don't want kids working straight away. Why? Because in school is where they can be indoctrinated. I'm pretty sure it was Lenin who said, give me a child in 8 years, I will give you a Bolshevik, or something to that effect. Meaning that those are the formative years. And once they're indoctrinated, they're probably indoctrinated for life. All right, those school years, those early school years. So, yeah, that's what that means, I think, to me. And then the combination of education with industrial production. What does our public school, what are the foundations of our public schools now? That is the foundations of them. The factory model. So they're getting indoctrinated ideologically, philosophically, while being on the beep, on the classroom beep, classroom beep. Listen to the boss, the teacher. Yes, yes, yes. Repeat. Yes, yes, yes. Beep. Next class. That's the model. Yep. We're doing it. We're already doing it. Yeah, universal K through 12. That happens. That's taxpayer funded. We have child labor laws, so there's no factory. Yeah, that right there. But I think that was more of an ideological thing. Like, we want to indoctrinate them first, is what the communists are saying. Now, we got Bernie and so forth trying to carry on with there needs to be free, colleges need to be free. What does free mean? There is no such thing as free. There is no such thing. And if something is free, then what does it mean? It's not valued. It's cheap. There's scarcity. There's a way that the market works, and the market encompasses all things. It's not free. The quality, if you can't pay an intelligent professor who's objective and smart and the ability to teach, if you can't pay him what he's worth, he's going to go somewhere else. So you get the free guy. Well, we give him a universal income. Well, who pays for that? It's madness. It's all madness. Bernie Sanders said that the time is long overdue to make public colleges and universities tuition free. How are you going to pay for it? You going to depend on the football team to bring in the revenue from the games? Well, isn't that capitalism? We're providing entertainment. You're paying for that entertainment. It's just then the money goes and gets redistributed however, right? Excuse me, God, I'm sorry. So look, there's already parallels in America. There's already. And it's tragic. And we should work as diligently and as hard as possible to erase what already exists that supports these pillars and go back to our pillars, the Constitution. Yeah. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here, man, pretty soon. So anyway, subterfuge. I was talking about why the three systems, communism, socialism, democratic socialism, are not different, that they are the same. It's not the opposite at all. Democratic socialism is just a branch. They're all three just branches from the same ideological family tree. They're all just branches from the same ideological family tree. The term democratic, again, I'm saying that with air fingers quotes, it's just a virtue signal. It's just a virtue signal. It's only for surface level, again, subterfuge. They say they reject authoritarian methods, but the logical consequences of the policies lead to authoritarian methods. Democratic socialism never really harshly denounces any of the communist method. They just say, oh, we don't do that. We don't do it that way. But they do openly rage, I'll say rage, against capitalism and all things capitalistic. So the terms they all have the same vision. They all have the same enemy, and therefore they are the same. Only superficial differences exist. And you can't show me instances where that's not the case. So as one of my listeners, as you out there in the wild listening to this, and I hope you're enjoying it, please, I do want your feedback. You got to look past these labels and this identity politics and understand it for what it is, whether it's called communism, socialism, democratic socialism, that movement or those three movements combined, they all advocate for state control. That's it. And the little democratic label is just it's a shallow rhetorical distinction for public relations. It's top cover to try just to superficially separate them from, again, the blood-stained legacy that communism leaves in its wake. The overlaps in these ideologies, they're not overlaps. They're just slightly branched off a little. They're no different at all. And they're all very deliberate. And they're all rooted in the same exact Marxist ideology. And they're all still creeping around by whatever name in today's political discourse to make politicians more palatable at the ballot box. This has been my final episode, folks, on communism. I may, we may revisit this in a few years from now. So that's it. That a lot of that stuff was repeated, but I want you to understand the 10 pillars of communism all demand government control. And any of you out there who are communists or socialist or democratic socialist, whatever you choose to call yourself, or even leftist progressives, imagine, yes, we want the government control. And this is why I know ultimately, even if you vote your way into it, it will still become a single party dictatorship at some point. This is how I know this. Because if you want government control so bad, imagine the other guy The other party is the party that emerges as the top dog in the system. And then you are at the mercy of them. And you can't vote your way out of it. That's it. All right, folks. This has been the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I do welcome feedback. I want to hear what you have to say about it. Don't call me names. Don't tell me I'm stupid. You show me factual, objective arguments and truths, and I'll listen to them. But that's it. I think I have more proof against than you have for. That's what I think. All right. Thanks for listening. Please follow all the things. The juntopodcast.com is where you can find this, or on all the platforms, of course. I mean, you're listening to it. OspreyShootingSolutions.com, where you can find all the shooting stuff. And also, I have started to expand my security consulting efforts. So if you are a leader, or you own, or you run an organization, a small to medium-sized business, church, school, whatever organization, we do SOP development, security SOP development. We do threat and vulnerability assessments, and we will even do red team threat testing on your facility if you like. And we do a security considerations class, and that's sort of the entry level, right? I'll come and spend a couple hours. We'll do the course, do the class, a PowerPoint, but it's an open forum discussion. But it's very thorough, and it's very thought-provoking. So consider that. And then don't forget twoteamguys.com, good people. Don't forget that. And then last but certainly not least, please, if you have the means, voluntarily, please give to givesingo.com/help-a-homie-fund. That is our efforts to be charitable in our community. Okay, good people. Be good to each other. Be open-minded. Be objective. Take in all the information and process it objectively. Take care of yourself. Be good to other people. I love you guys.